What's happening, guys? Today we're going to talk about which approach is better for you, a slower cut or a faster approach to weight loss. Alright, so when it comes to a cutting phase, we typically have two options. We can either do a faster approach or a slower approach. What I want to talk about today is some of the pros and cons that go behind each method, and then at the end of the video, I'm going to tell you which approach I think works the best and gives the best results. So stay tuned. Okay, so let's start with a faster cut. We'll start with the pros. The very first pro would be that it doesn't turn into this big, long grind. All right, so with a faster cut, that means you're done faster. You just kind of get in, you get out, you hit it hard, and you're done with it. So it doesn't turn into this like really long, overbearing thing that can take a big part of the year. You just do it real quick and get out. Another pro would be results are just motivating. Like, let's just be honest. You know, how many times have you gone through a cut and been really motivated by the results that you see? So when you take a faster approach to cutting, you're going to lose more weight, and that feels really good, and that can be motivating. And it can actually make it easier to stick to the plan. So sometimes by taking the faster approach and creating these faster results, it can feel really good, be really motivating, and it'll help you stick to the plan. And you know, I've seen a lot of people who go through a slower cut, and over time it kind of wears on them a little bit, and since they're getting slower results, it feels demotivating, and a lot of times that can even cause a lack of adherence, which makes the process go even longer then, because now you're not sticking to the plan, you're not seeing as good of the results, and you see these adaptations happen within the body that make it more difficult to lose weight. So sometimes by just taking that faster approach, you feel more motivated and you feel better about things and you feel really good about the faster progress, and it helps you stick to the plan. And the last pro I want to mention is basically you just get to spend less time not dieting. You know what I mean? Like, one of the things you hear me talk about frequently is how we don't want to be dieting all the time. You shouldn't be dieting more than you aren't dieting, because there's so many self-defense mechanisms inside the body that really make it hard to diet over and over and over again effectively. And if you only diet for a short period of time because you hit it hard and get out, that means you can spend that much more time not dieting, going through a reverse and going through building or whatever your goals are after the dieting phase. You can spend more of your time in a good spot calorically, so that next time you come back to diet again, you're in a better spot metabolically to see better results. So there are benefits of not spending a lot of time in a deficit and just getting out really quick. Okay, but on the flip side, let's do the cons of a faster cut. The first and foremost thing that comes to my mind is you're gonna get those diet feels faster. You're gonna start feeling the effects of dieting faster, because in order to see faster results, the only way to do that is to create a bigger energy gap, which means you need to drop your calories that much more, you need to increase your cardio that much more to see faster results, and therefore you're gonna start getting things like fatigue and strength loss and things like that that are gonna happen much faster than would happen if you took a slower cut. So you're gonna feel those diet feels a lot faster than you would than if you did a slower cut. And on top of that, the faster you go, the more at risk you are for losing muscle, which obviously you don't want to do. If you missed the video that I did on Monday about getting shredded easy, I will put that at the end of the video, and this is something that I covered in it. But if you are losing weight at a faster rate than about 1 to 1.5% of your body weight on average on a weekly basis, you are really running the risk or increasing the risk of losing muscle as well as fat. Whereas if you take a slower approach, you're going to be utilizing mostly fat for energy. On a faster approach, if you start going above that percentage, you're at a much higher risk of losing muscle as well as fats, and we really don't want to be sacrificing our lean body mass. At least we want to minimize that as much as possible. So one of the cons of a faster approach is you are more likely to lose muscle as well as body fat. Another con to the faster dieting would be it just makes it much more difficult to be flexible, not only with the food choices that you have on a daily basis, but also just kind of regular life stuff, occasions, parties, holidays, things like that. If you're trying to be really aggressive and you have really low calories, you just don't have a lot of room, a lot of options, and a lot of time to be okay with having these kind of like hiccups that come along the way where you will be overeating or potentially overeating, and it'll just make it that much more difficult. You can't really go out and enjoy eating out as much and having these special occasions if you want to keep the progress going. And that's not to say that you can't like enjoy life at all and that you have to just stick to your diet all the time, but if you want to see fast results, the more that you avoid those types of situations, the faster your results are going to be. So there is that trade-off. And as I've talked about many times in the past, flexibility and accuracy are kind of on a sliding scale. So if you are really low calorie, that means you need to be more accurate just by nature. Because of the lower calories, you just are now less flexible. You won't be able to include as many treats into your diet, and you have to be more bro to be able to hit your numbers, just because otherwise you'll be starving if you try to fit in too many treats. So there is that aspect of things as well. However, I will say on the flip side of things, we do have to also keep in mind that it's a shorter period of time. So you could make the argument that by taking a shorter time and doing a faster cut, while you may need to go harder during that time, you'll have more time to be in a surplus, or at least at maintenance and reversing, where like if you look at the year as a whole, you'll have more time to be able to enjoy food versus that short time where you have to be more restrictive. So it kind of depends on how you look at it. Okay, now let's talk about a slow cut, the pros of a slow cut. The biggest pro, probably that you just don't have to be so aggressive. So on the flip side of fast cut, now you don't have to be so aggressive with your changes. You don't have to cut calories quite so low. You don't have to increase your cardio quite so much right off the bat. And oftentimes in the earlier stages, especially of a slower cut, it really doesn't even feel like you're dieting. I am in show prep right now and I'm 2 weeks in, but we are taking a slower approach. I literally have like a 28-week prep. So it's a longer prep, but that means we don't have to be really aggressive. So I'm still eating a lot of calories, not doing a ton of cardio. So it doesn't really even feel like I'm dieting right now. I actually kind of am enjoying things. I felt like I was eating so much before that it's actually kind of nice to kind of dial it back and not have to eat so much. So when you're doing a slow cut, it can be nice because you don't feel like you're dieting, especially in the earlier stages. It takes longer of the slower dieting until you start to get those diet feels down the road. Now on the flip side with life in general, all right, you can enjoy more stuff. It's much easier to go out to eat, more to go to occasions and parties and holidays and things like that, and still be able to stay somewhat on track. And even if you don't want to stay on track for those times, it doesn't matter quite as much because you're still going to be closer than you would have been, and it's going to be easier to keep the process going. So it's much easier to life during the actual dieting phase if you're not being quite so aggressive. But again, we had to factor in the whole picture of the entire year as well. But in the actual dieting phase, it's much easier to be more flexible and include more treats into your diet and things like that you would potentially want to do to make it more sustainable. So while a faster approach is typically a little bit more unsustainable, a slower approach will feel more sustainable. However, I would argue that the sustainability factor is more towards the whole picture than just a dieting phase, but that's going to be for a future video. Now, kind of adding on to that last one, we can also take more approaches to keep the process going and see better long-term results. We can do things like diet breaks and things like that more frequently and not rush the process so that you keep yourself in a good spot hormonally and metabolically to continue to see results long-term. Whereas when you're being really aggressive, you don't have as many options to do this, and there's going to be more quick adaptations that are happening and make it more difficult to do this. If you are taking a slower approach, you can take your time, you can be more flexible, you can add in multiple diet breaks, and you can not rush the process and keep your body in a better position to be able to keep seeing results long term and see those good long term results. And then of course, you're more likely to maintain more of your muscle, keep more of your strength, and just feel better overall during the process, at least in the earlier stages, especially doing a slower cut. Now on the flip side, the cons of a slower dieting phase is that it can really drag out and kind of get to you after a while. So no matter what, like dieting is just, it's never going to be easy. And sometimes if you've been dieting for a really long time, even if you're eating more, it just feels like, hey, like, is this ever going to be over with? It can feel like you're just never going to get there, and it can be kind of demotivating. So again, on the flip side of things, where we talked about before with the pro side of the faster, it can be motivating to see those fast results. With the slower process, you're going to see slower results, and sometimes for some people that can really lead to problems. All right, so if you are someone who gets really demotivated by a lack of results, it can kind of get to you, and then if you start having problems with adherence and sticking to the plan because of this, well, then we need to kind of address this. Now, I would argue that you really need to get past that, because basing your decisions and what you do based on results is a really dangerous trap that a lot of people fall into. But if that's just kind of your personality and something that you notice, you may do better with a faster cut. Another con is that you'll be forced to not diet for a much longer period of time if you want to do things effectively. So one thing that I talk about is that if you are going into a dieting phase, you typically don't want to diet if you haven't not dieted for as long as you previously dieted. So what I mean is, like, say for instance you dieted for 6 months previously, and then you got out of a diet and then you started reversing. If you haven't been out of dieting for at least 6 months, you don't even want to think about it, and you should probably do it longer, honestly. That's like the bare minimum, is however long you dieted. So if you do a cut where you drag on for a long time, if you do a 6, 7, 8 month diet, well, you're not going to want to even think about dieting again for 6, 7, 8 months again after that. So kind of depending on how much you have to lose and what your kind of personality is, that could work potentially against you. And it forces you into a longer off season, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can be depending on who you are and what you're trying to accomplish. So it's just one of those things you have to think about. If you are doing a slower cut and it drags on and on and on and on, especially if you're not adhering very well and making it worse than it needs to be, which is another part of the con side of the equation, is if you don't see the results that you want and you have a hard time adhering to the plan, and now it drags on that much longer, it's just really going to work against you long term. So again, you kind of have to know yourself. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about what I think most people typically do better with, but also I'm going to talk about who typically seems to see the best, most drastic results. So I have found through working with a couple hundred people by now that it really seems like the majority of people tend to do better with shorter cuts with deadlines that you just have specifically for them. All right, so you're going to be a little bit more aggressive and you're going to get after it, but you're going to set a deadline and you're going to say, okay, say for instance, we're going to cut for the next 16 weeks and maybe throw in like a diet break in the middle or something like that. What I find is a lot of people do really well if they have that deadline, because it keeps them focused on what they're trying to accomplish. So it's like, okay, I have 16 weeks. I know I can stick to this because I know when it's going to be over. Whereas if you leave like this kind of loose, open-ended thing, a lot of times people kind of like have a really hard time sticking to the program because they feel like, well, there's no end in sight. It feels like it's never going to end, and they feel like there's no rush and there's no urgency. And when you're lacking urgency, a lot of times a lot of action isn't being taken. And then again, if you're not creating that action, if you're not really taking it seriously, all you're doing is slowing down your metabolism without getting great results, and it's going to make it take that much longer. And it can turn into this really big thing that really works against you. So sometimes it works better to have a shorter goal where you say, I'm just going to hit it hard for this amount of time, and then I'm going to get out, and then we can think about dieting again later. And it doesn't mean like if you get to the end of however long you set your dieting phase for, it doesn't mean if you get there and you want to lose a little bit more, it doesn't mean you can't extend it. It's not like you couldn't be like, okay, well, let's add on 4 more weeks or something like that. You certainly could, but just by having that deadline, it creates extra focus and oftentimes creates better results. Now, with that being said, the people who I have worked with, who I have noticed who have gotten the most dramatic kind of jaw-dropping results, are the people who take the slower approach and can just kind of continue to work on things no matter what. But you have to understand that everyone's a little bit different. So if you're someone who can just stick to the program and just trust the process and just do what you're supposed to do and just keep going and not worry about how long it's going to take and not get caught up in all the different emotions and things like that, then the slower approach is going to be better for you, because you're going to be able to see better long-term results, because you're going to be able to take these approaches like diet breaks and things like that to keep the process going, and you're going to keep your body from adapting to the lower calories better and be able to continue to see results and keep it going and keep it going and keep it going. But if you're the type of person who does not do well like that and needs deadlines and needs more focus, then just saying because people typically get better results taking a slower, longer approach means I should do it is a big mistake. You have to understand who you are and what makes you tick, and everyone is different. So like always, it depends. If you're someone who can just take the slow road and stick to the program and just continue to go, you'll see really good long-term results and you'll probably get the most dramatic results. But if that's not you and you tend to waver around and struggle with sticking to the program if it goes on too long, well, then you need to take the faster approach and maybe do something like a cut with a deadline, or at least just be more aggressive and understand that you can just get back out at a certain point. All right, I want to hear from you. What do you prefer? Do you do better with a longer cut or a shorter cut? I would like to know and just see like kind of what the general consensus is. And like I said, I have that video that I will put up here that you can check out about getting shredded. And I have another one at the end of this video that I will put up about how long is too long to cut if you're interested in that. So anyway, thank you guys for watching as always, and I will see you next time.
I'm addicted to the love that you're giving. Every minute, every day I've been craving.